On September 3rd, 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit an all-time high. The party was loud, the champagne was flowing. A prominent economist named Irving Fisher stood up and famously declared, "Stock prices have reached what looks like a permanently high plateau." He believed that poverty was defeated. He believed that the golden age would last forever. 55 days later, the market lost 11% of its value in a single morning. Men who were millionaires at breakfast were bankrupt by lunch. Now, fast forward to today. Look at the headlines in 2026. Look at the artificial intelligence boom. Look at the crypto markets. Look at the real estate prices that defy gravity. Do you hear the echo? We are hearing the same phrases. This time is different. Technology has changed the rules. We have defeated the business cycle. But history is a wheel, and the wheel is turning again. Welcome to Clean Slate Audiobook. Today, we are opening the black box of the most terrifying financial disaster in human history. We are diving into the new masterpiece by Andrew Ross Sorkin, 1929. This is not just a history lesson, this is a mirror. Sorkin has uncovered thousands of forgotten documents, secret diaries, and private letters from the bankers and politicians who watched the world burn. And what he found is terrifying. The crash didn't happen because of numbers, it happened because of psychology. It happened because of greed, blindness, and the seductive lie that the party would never end. In this series, we are going to ask the question that is keeping everyone awake at night. Is 2026 the new 1929? Are we standing on the edge of the cliff just like they were? Let's wipe the slate clean and look at the warning signs. The Roaring Twenties versus the tech boom. To understand the crash, you have to understand the high. The 1920s were called the Roaring Twenties for a reason. It was a decade of explosion. Radio was the new internet. Automobiles were the new AI. Electricity was lighting up cities for the first time. Productivity was skyrocketing. Ordinary people, for the first time in history, were buying stocks. The shoeshine boy had stock tips. The cook had a brokerage account. Andrew Ross Sorkin describes a scene where a banker, Charles Mitchell, the head of National City Bank, started selling stocks to the public like they were groceries. He opened branches on every street corner. He told people, "You deserve to be rich." Does this sound familiar? Open your phone, look at the trading apps, look at the finfluencers on TikTok telling you which coin will go to the moon. In 1929, they bought on margin, borrowed money. In 2026, we buy with leverage. The words change, but the mechanics are identical. We are borrowing from a future we cannot afford to pay for a present we haven't earned. Sorkin reveals that in 1929, the market was not driven by value. It was driven by the greater fool theory. It didn't matter if a company made profit. It only mattered if you could sell the stock to someone else for a higher price tomorrow. That is the definition of a bubble. And bubbles don't hiss when they leak, they pop. The invisible cracks. But here is the scary part. The crash didn't come out of nowhere. The cracks were there for months, but nobody wanted to look at them. In the spring of 1929, the Federal Reserve saw the danger. They tried to gently raise interest rates to cool down the speculation, but the market didn't care. The market ignored the Fed. Sorkin introduces us to a character named Paul Warburg. He was one of the few men who sounded the alarm. In March 1929, he warned that if the speculation didn't stop, it would bring about a general depression involving the entire country. Do you know what happened to him? He was laughed at. He was called a dinosaur. He was accused of shorting American prosperity. This is the psychological phenomenon known as normalcy bias. When things have been good for a long time, our brains physically cannot imagine them going bad. We filter out the warnings. We delete the bad news. In 2026, we see supply chain cracks. We see geopolitical tension. We see debt levels that are mathematically impossible to repay. But we look at the stock market and it is green, so we say, everything is fine. We are dancing on the deck of the Titanic, complaining that the music is too slow, while the iceberg is already scraping the hull. The mechanics of the crash. Sorkin's book breaks down the specific mechanism that turned a correction into a catastrophe: leverage. In 1929, you could buy $100 worth of stock with only $10 of your own money. You borrowed the other $90. This was great on the way up. You made 10 times the profit, but on the way down, it was a death sentence. If the stock dropped just 10%, your money was wiped out. If it dropped 20%, you owed money you didn't have. This triggered the margin calls. The brokers demanded cash. The investors didn't have cash, so they had to sell their stocks. This selling drove prices down further, which triggered more margin calls, which forced more selling. It was a feedback loop from hell. Sorkin details the panic in the boiler rooms. Ticker tapes fell hours behind because they couldn't print the falling numbers fast enough. People were selling blindly, not knowing the price, just screaming, "Sell, sell, sell." Today, we have algorithmic trading, high-frequency bots that execute trades in milliseconds. If a crash happens in 2026, it won't take days, it will take minutes. The flash crash scenarios Sorkin discusses are not a possibility. They are a mathematical certainty in a leveraged system, the human toll. But the most powerful part of Sorkin's new book is not the economics, it is the stories of the people. He tells the story of Jesse Livermore, the great bear of Wall Street. Livermore made $100 million in the crash, equivalent to billions today, by shorting the market. He came home to his wife, who was crying because she thought they were ruined. He told her, "No, darling, we are richer than ever." But money didn't save him. The depression that followed destroyed his soul, and eventually he took his own life. Sorkin contrasts this with the story of a middle-class family in Ohio who lost their life savings in a bank run. They didn't speculate, they didn't gamble, they just put their money in a safe bank. But when the bank collapsed, their future evaporated. This is the lesson. In a systemic collapse, there are no bystanders. You might hate Wall Street, you might hate crypto, but if the system breaks, the shards of glass hit everyone. As we end part 1, the market of 1,929 is still hovering at its peak. The cracks are visible, but the band is still playing. The question Sorkin asks us is, can we see what they couldn't? We have better data now, we have better regulations, but do we have better human nature? Greed is the same. Fear is the same. And gravity. Gravity is definitely the same. In part 2, we will walk through the terrifying days of October. We will see Black Thursday and Black Tuesday. We will witness the moment the illusion shattered, and we will learn how the smart money tried and failed to catch the falling knife. Is your portfolio ready? Is your mindset ready? This is Clean Slate Audiobook. We are just getting started, but gravity is a patient executioner. It waits. And in late October of 1929, gravity finally came to collect its debt. To understand the sheer terror of what happened next, you have to understand the atmosphere. It wasn't just a bad day at the office, it was a psychological breaking point for an entire civilization. On the morning of Thursday, October 24th, the day that history would brand as Black Thursday, the weather in New York City was strange. It was cloudy, damp, and unseasonably warm. There was a heaviness in the air, a static charge that made the hair on your arms stand up. Inside the Great Hall of the New York Stock Exchange, the noise began before the bell even rang. Usually, the floor was a place of organized chaos, but today, it smelled of fear. Traders were sweating. Their eyes were darting around, looking for reassurance that wasn't there. High above the trading floor, in the visitors' gallery, a British politician named Winston Churchill looked down at the scene. He had come to America to see the miracle of the new economy. Instead, he was about to witness its funeral. He later wrote that he saw a wild fear in the eyes of the crowd, a primal energy that he had only seen before in war zones. At 10 o'clock sharp, the gavel struck. Clang. The sound usually signaled opportunity. Today, it signaled a massacre. In the first 30 minutes, stock prices didn't just fall, they evaporated. There were no buyers. Understand this. The stock market relies on the premise that for every seller, there is a buyer. But what happens when the buyers disappear? What happens when you hold a share of General Motors and you scream, "Sell," and silence is the only answer? The price drops. It drops to $10, no buyers, $5, no buyers, $1. Panic is not a decision. It is a contagion. It spreads faster than a virus. By 11 o'clock, the roar on the floor was deafening. Men were screaming, their collars torn open, their faces purple with exertion. But the most terrifying thing was the machine, the ticker tape. The ticker tape was the heartbeat of the world. It was a machine that printed the current stock prices on a thin strip of paper in offices all across America. But the machine had a physical limit. It could only print so many characters per minute. The selling was so violent, so fast, that the machine choked. It fell behind, 5 minutes late, then 20 minutes, then an hour. This delay was fatal. Imagine you are an investor in Chicago or San Francisco. You are watching the tape. It says your stock is at $100. You feel safe. But in reality, on the floor in New York, that stock is already trading at $60. You are bankrupt, and you don't even know it yet. The information gap created a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed the wildest rumors. People whispered that the Buffalo Exchange had closed. They whispered that 11 speculators had already jumped out of windows. The rumors weren't true, but in the absence of truth, fear becomes reality. By noon, the market was in freefall. The crowd outside on Wall Street had grown to thousands of people. They stood in a stunned silence, watching the building like it was a burning house. The police commissioner had to dispatch a special unit of mounted police just to keep the streets clear. It looked like a revolution was beginning. But then, the doors of the J.P. Morgan building, specifically number 23 Wall Street, opened. This was the fortress of American capitalism. Inside, the 5 most powerful bankers in the country had gathered for a secret emergency meeting. These were men who didn't answer to the president. The president answered to them. Thomas Lamont of J.P. Morgan, Charles Mitchell of National City Bank, Albert Wiggin of Chase. They sat around a mahogany table, smoking cigars, and they made a decision. They would not let the market die. They would manipulate it back to life. They pooled their resources, putting up millions of dollars of their own bank's money to create a floor. They were going to catch the falling knife with their bare hands. At 1:30 p.m., the doors of the stock exchange swung open, and Richard Whitney strode onto the floor. Whitney was the vice president of the exchange, a man of immense stature and arrogance. He moved through the screaming crowd like a priest entering a riot. He walked straight to the post where U.S. Steel was traded. The current price was collapsing. Whitney asked in a booming voice for the price. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, he shouted, "I buy 10,000 shares at 205. The room froze. 205 was significantly higher than the last sale. He was overpaying on purpose. He was sending a signal. He then walked to another post and bought another blue chip stock, and another. The effect was electric. "The bankers are buying," the shout went up. "They are saving us." Greed replaced fear instantly. Traders rushed to follow Whitney's lead. The market turned. Prices rocketed back up. By the time the closing bell rang at 3 o'clock, the market had recovered almost all of its losses. People hugged each other. They wiped the sweat from their brows. They truly believed that the masters of the universe had fixed the glitch. They went home that night thinking the nightmare was over. They were wrong. The nightmare had merely taken a breath. The weekend is the enemy of a crashing market. If the crash had happened on a Tuesday, maybe the momentum of the recovery would have held. But the investors had Saturday and Sunday to think. They sat at their kitchen tables in Ohio, in Kansas, in California. They looked at the newspapers, they did the math, they realized that the recovery was artificial. It was a stage play put on by a few rich men, and more importantly, the telegrams started arriving, the margin calls. In the 1920s, you could buy stock with 10% down. You borrowed the rest from your broker, but when the stock dropped, the broker demanded immediate repayment of the loan. Millions of Americans received these telegrams over the weekend. Pay up by Monday morning, or we sell everything. They didn't have the cash. They had mortgages, they had bills. So, when the sun rose on Monday, there was only one decision left to make. Sell. Sell everything to pay the debt. And then came Tuesday, October 29th. Black Tuesday. If Thursday was panic, Tuesday was execution. When the opening bell rang, there was no Richard Whitney to save them. The bankers had realized the hole was too deep. They stepped aside and let the market die. This time, it wasn't just the speculators selling. It was the smart money. The Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Kennedys, they were liquidating. Sorkin describes scenes of utter devastation. Stocks of massive, profitable companies that built the railroads and the steel mills of America, were being sold for pennies. White-collar professionals, men who had been millionaires days ago, were seen weeping openly on the street corners. One of the victims was the famous comedian Groucho Marx. Groucho was not a gambler. He was a careful man. He had put his life savings into safe stocks, advised by the best experts. On Black Tuesday, his broker called him. "Marx," the broker said, "the collateral is gone. You have to put up more cash." "I don't have any more cash," Groucho said. "Then you are wiped out," the broker replied, and hung up. Groucho later wrote, "I would have lost less money if I had just thrown dollar bills into the fireplace for warmth." He lost $240,000 that day, millions in today's money. He was one of the lucky ones. He had a job. Others lost their homes, their dignity, and their will to live. The ticker tape didn't stop running until 7:45 that evening, 4 hours after the market had closed. The clerks were wading through knee-deep piles of paper tape on the floor. It looked like the confetti from a parade, but it was the debris of an empire. The silence that fell over Wall Street that night was heavy. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a funeral. The great illusion was over. The philosophy of permanent prosperity was dead. But as the investors walked home in the dark, they didn't yet know the worst part. They thought they had just lost their money. They didn't realize they were about to lose their country. The crash was just the trigger. The bullet was still traveling through the air, aimed straight at the heart of the real economy. Banks were holding those worthless stock certificates as collateral for loans. Factories were dependent on the spending of those now bankrupt consumers. The dominoes began to fall in slow motion. First the portfolios, then the banks, then the jobs, and finally the food on the table. Sorkin asks us to look at this moment and freeze it. Look at the transition. One day, you are buying a new radio on credit, planning your summer vacation. The next day, you are wondering if your bank will be open in the morning. This speed, this terrifying velocity of collapse is what we must remember in 2026. We think our modern systems are robust. We think we have circuit breakers that stop trading if things drop too fast. But circuit breakers only stop the computers. They don't stop the fear. You can unplug the machine, but you cannot unplug human nature. When the psychology shifts from greed to survival, there is no amount of liquidity that can fill the hole. As we move into the final chapter of this story, we have to look at the wreckage. What happens when the dust settles? How did a stock market crash turn into a Great Depression that lasted 10 years? And most importantly, what are the specific signals, the canaries in the coal mine, that are flashing red right now in our time? We are going to examine the dead cat bounce, the false hope that traps the final victims, and we are going to look at the few who survived. How did they do it? Did they have cash? Did they hold gold? Or did they simply understand that when the music stops, you don't look for a chair, you run for the door? The crash is over. The depression begins. The crash was over, but the pain had just begun. When the adrenaline of Black Tuesday faded, America woke up to a new, grey reality. The Great Depression didn't happen overnight. It was a slow strangulation. And this is the part of history that Andrew Ross Sorkin urges us to study most closely, because this is the part that mirrors our future in 2026. The first thing that vanished wasn't money, it was trust. Banks stopped lending, businesses stopped hiring, people stopped buying. It was a liquidity trap. Sorkin tells the story of ordinary people lining up around the block to withdraw their savings from banks, only to have the doors slammed in their faces. In the digital age of 2026, we won't see lines on the street. We will see server errors and withdrawals suspended messages on our screens. The mechanism is different, but the result is the same. Your assets are frozen. The system locks you out. So, who survived? And more importantly, who thrived? History gives us clues. While millions lost everything, a few individuals walked away with fortunes. How? Lesson 1. Cash is king. Joseph Kennedy, the father of JFK, famously sold all his stocks before the crash because a shoeshine boy gave him stock tips. He realized that when everyone is greedy, it's time to be fearful. He sat on a mountain of cash. When the market hit rock bottom, he didn't panic. He went shopping. He bought real estate and companies for pennies on the dollar. In 2026, cash might mean different things. It might mean liquidity. It might mean having assets that are not correlated to the algorithm. The lesson is, when the bubble pops, he who holds the liquidity owns the world. Lesson 2. Value matters. Floyd Odlum was a lawyer who became one of the richest men in America during the Depression. While everyone was selling, he was looking for value. He bought the utilities, the companies that provided electricity and water. Why? Because even in a depression, people need lights. People need water. In our modern context, look for the utilities of the future. What will people need even if the AI bubble bursts? They will need energy, they will need food, they will need security. Sorkin warns us against the glamour stocks, the hype, the memes, the tech that has no profit. When the tide goes out, we will see who is swimming naked. The survivors will be the ones holding tangible, boring, essential value. Lesson 3. The danger of debt. The victims of 1929 were not necessarily bad investors, they were just leveraged investors. They owed money. When the price dropped, the debt killed them. The survivors were debt-free. They could wait. They could endure the winter because they didn't have a banker knocking on their door. If you take one thing from this book, let it be this. In uncertain times, deleverage. Pay off the credit cards. Own your assets outright. Debt is a rope around your neck. In a boom, it pulls you up, but in a crash, it hangs you. The 2026 warning. So, is 2026 the new 1929? Sorkin argues that the parallels are undeniable. We have the wealth gap, we have the speculation, we have the belief in a new era of technology. But we also have something they didn't have. We have the history book. We know how the story ends. The crash of 1929 teaches us that the economy is not a machine. It is a collection of human emotions. It is driven by stories. And right now, the story is changing. The great illusion is fading. But this is not a message of despair. This is a message of preparation. A clean slate is coming. For some, it will be a disaster. For others, the prepared ones, it will be the greatest opportunity of a lifetime. The market transfers wealth from the impatient to the patient, from the blind to the observant. As we close the book on 1929, look at your own financial house. Are you dancing on the deck of the Titanic? Or are you preparing the lifeboat? Don't fear the crash. Respect it, understand it, and be ready to rebuild when the dust settles. Because after every winter, spring eventually comes. The economy will recover. The question is, will you still be in the game when it does? This has been the complete summary of 1929 by Andrew Ross Sorkin. We stepped out of our usual topics today because your mental peace depends on your financial security. If you want more deep dives into the books that explain our world, hit subscribe. Clean your mind, clean your debts, and prepare for the future. This is Clean Slate Audiobook. Thank you for listening.